I'm very glad to welcome Tomaso Duso as the CLEEN Keynote. Tomaso is the head of the Farmer Markets Department at DIW Berlin. He's also a professor at the Technical University in Berlin. He has a very long list of papers in empirical industrial organization, many of which focus on competition and bring relevant policy implications. So for example, I think that, one of the first names that come to mind is his when we think about post-merger evaluation studies. He's one of the pioneers of the literature in Europe. And complementing his rich and productive academic life, has been also very active in policy circles. So he is a member of the German Monopolies Commission and of the Economic Board of the European Commission. Has advised the DG competition of the European Commission and many domestic or national competition authorities. So, we see we're very lucky to have him. And please, Tomaso, the floor is yours. Let me just mention that he is happy to answer questions during his presentation, not only at the end of the Q&A. So, if you have questions, let us know.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and an honor to give a keynote lecture. I'm very happy to have a discussion with you. So I'm presenting my work, but so I'm very interested to have your comments and questions. So don't hesitate to stop me at any time. So I will present a paper that is a joint work with Klaus Gugler, Joanna Pichuska, and Pauline Affelt. Joanna is now at the chief economist team, DG Comp. We evaluate merger control. So we have to disclaim that her views in this paper are not the one of the European Commission, and I have to disclose that the views are my views and not the one of the German Monopolies Commission. And the paper is about European merger control. That's an obsession I have. It's over 20 years that I'm working on European merger control, trying to make sense whether this very important tool has been effectively enforced or not. But before doing that, I thought, so it's nice to have a keynote lecture, so let's make things a bit broader and try to place this paper in the broader discussion that has been extremely lively over the past, say, 7-8 years. And it's a discussion that put competition policy again at the center of the policy discussions, which make me very happy being a competition economist who believe that competition policy is a central tool to make the economy works as it should be. So to show that the discussion becomes very central, in 2018, there was this issue of the economists talking about the next capitalist revolution, right? And that they, and it's a very nice issue, and it's the issue is taking the academic debates about concentration, markups increase into the more general policy discussion. So, and the thesis of that issue was, so markets are not competitive anymore. We should do something. Competition should come back, right? So, so that issue was using results from research, so that this graph is coming from the study of Gutierrez and Philippon that showed that some measure of concentration at the industry level, like the Erfidal index or measure of entry and exit, so the concentration is increasing over time, entry and exit is decreasing over time, and they said, so we have a problem In the US, markets are becoming more and more concentrated. So this first kind of analysis has been replicated by other people looking at other countries, like the people at the OECD, looking at Europe, or people like us, looking at other definition of markets. So these are industries, we use product markets, people like Banker and Al using also local market instead of large national industries. So that was one part. The other part of the discussion is coming from this now super famous paper by Jan De Luca and Jan Eckhout, showing an increase in markups, first for the US, but then they had another paper looking at the increase in markups essentially all over the world. And showing this is not the issue of one specific industry, we observe it in many industries. So the discussion was concentration is increasing, markup is increasing, this is a problem, right? And the second step is, well, yes, it might be a problem, but maybe it's also not a problem. So why is concentration increasing? Why are markups increasing? Is because we have an increase of market power, or is because we have firms, also these so-called superstar firms that are just better than the others. They innovate more, they have better products, they can produce at scale, and this is actually good. So more concentration is just showing that the best firms get more and more market shares, right? So and again, so the discussion is not completely settled. So I think there are more people who think that increasing concentration, increasing margins is a problem than people who believe that that is not a problem. But so there are people on both sides. So one person who thinks that this is a problem is Thomas Philippon, who published a book last year or 2 years ago, and his claim is that actually the problem of increasing concentration is much more severe in the US than in Europe. And why? Well, because Europe is doing better in enforcing competition policy, right? So, so he is making this claim that the enforcement of competition policy and especially merger control is key to keep market competitive. So this discussion started actually in 2017. There was this huge conference at the Leibniz Centre at the University of Chicago, where all the people involved in this debate were coming and discussing about this trend. And the discussion went on. And a few weeks ago, the new conference of the Leibniz Centre was about the role of consumer welfare in competition policy, and the discussion there is related to what Thomas Philippon in his book is saying. So many people say, actually, we have this problem of increasing concentration in margins because competition policy is not working. In the US, they are blaming Borg's interpretation of what the consumer welfare is. In Europe, people say it has to do with this more economic approach, in merger control, but not only, that makes the action of enforcer not very effective, right? So to the point that some people, so like Tommaso Valletti, who has been chief economist at DG Comp some years ago, proposes to go back to a presumption-based approach in merger control that is a much clearer goal, and that would make enforcement much easier, right? So I put just two quotes from people who were present at the conference. at the pro-market webpage. Many of the people present at the conference published some policy paper. One of these is by Fox, who says, at the end, it seems that both economists and law scholars have overwhelmingly decided to move from the use of the consumer welfare standard, or at least use of the terminology. Somebody else, like Cristina Caffarra, who is always very vocal, said so, titled her piece, "Consumer Welfare is Dead. What do we do instead?" And she is saying, so that is the adoption of this consumer welfare, the idea that we have a more economic approach, looking more carefully about markets, is really the problem in Europe, and that led to under enforcement, right? So while on the train coming here this morning, I was looking at Twitter and said, so not everybody is believing that. So Brian Albrecht says, well, overwhelmingly is more a reflection of who attended the conference. And then Herbert Ovenkamp, who is a law scholar, said, well, I was there, and actually it was not so clear that everybody is against. So it's a heated debate. I think it's a healthy debate to think about what have we been doing in competition policy? Was it enforced or not? What is the implication for the working of the economy, right? So here, so the discussion is more general, is about competition policy, but in many of the pieces that I gave you, the role of mergers and merger control is crucial. And why is that? Well, because mergers, if you think about concentration, so every time you have a merger, you have an increase in concentration, right? So, and when markets become more concentrated and firms maybe increase their dominant position through the merger, then the abuse of its dominant position might become more likely, right? So many people, including myself, believe that merger control is a fundamental tool to keep markets competitive, right? So, and this is very much part of this debate. So assessing merger and assessing merger control is a key piece of assessing how effective competition policy can be. And it makes also clear the discussion about the welfare, consumer welfare standard, which is the way I always thought about mergers. And I think many in this room also think about mergers. So we think that if we have two firms that compete in a market and they want to merge, this will lead to some unilateral effects. So the incentive to increase prices, because you have less competition in the market, might also lead to some coordinated effects. So the likelihood of this, of the fewer firms in the market to collude, might also increase. On the other hand, and that goes back to the idea of Williamson, so it might be that through the mergers, these firms create synergies, and these synergies create efficiency. This efficiency gain of the merging parties compensate the negative impact of the merger. And at the end, in the new equilibrium, this is good for consumers. So that is the consumer welfare standard, right? So in the way I understand it. So that is the framework that I have in mind, and is also the framework that I will use in this paper. This level of efficiency that compensate the potential anti-competitive effects of a merger have been called in the literature compensating efficiencies, right? So, and that is the central part of what we will try to do in this paper. Now, if you look at the literature, try to assess mergers, you will find many, many papers now that look at the price effect of the merger, right? So you will find also fewer papers looking at other dimensions, like so quality, variety, innovation, right? So, you find little papers really trying to assess whether mergers increase the efficiency of the merging firms, right? So there are papers looking at the productivity effect of mergers, but really looking at the efficiency gains of mergers, there are very few. And the few, so I try to be balanced here. So there are some that find some small efficiencies. My reading of the literature is that most of the people that try to measure this efficiency find no efficiencies, right? So now, so I would say that is a fair characterization of what we know about efficiency. If you look at what happens about merger enforcement, you see that essentially everywhere in the world, and here I have two examples in the US and Europe, so the vast majority of the mergers are cleared unconditionally, right? So this is 85 to 90% of the mergers are clear unconditionally. So if we look at Europe, it's even more. So just 6% of the mergers are remedied, less than 0.5% are blocked, right? So today, Margarete Vestager gave a speech on European merger control, and she said, you know, most of the mergers actually are beneficial, so we should not do anything. We try to make it easy for companies to do that. Some of the mergers are problematic, and then we have to do something, right? So, but the large majority of the mergers are clear. So if you have these framework in mind, so what you have to conclude from these pieces of evidence is that the presumption is that most of the merger generate efficiency gains that compensate the unilateral effects, right? And that is exactly what we try to do in this paper. So in this paper, which is a simple exercise, so we will try to measure these compensating efficiencies. And to do that, we will use a theoretical framework that is based on Volker Nocke and Mike Winston paper, actually on Nico paper with Volker, which is the base of the Nocke and Winston paper, which else is a generalization of the Farrell and Shapiro paper. And we just take this framework and apply it to a data set that I've been building for many, many years now at the DIW on all merger decision by DG Comp between 1919 and 2018. So merging these two things, we try to characterize or look at the distribution of compensating efficiency gain. We try to decompose this compensating efficiency as a function of the characteristic of the mergers, and then we do a last step and try to use this to think about whether we can ex ante evaluate what DG Comp was doing, right? So it's not a typical ex post evaluation. For that, we need an additional piece. And we just compare what the Commission did to this theoretical framework based on Nocke and Winston and some presumption about what we think that might be too high compensating efficiency to be achievable, okay?
Maybe I just misunderstood, but when you discussed the previous slide, it seemed to me that you made a distinction between productivity gains and efficiency gains. And what is the difference?
It's a good question. So when we think about efficiency gains, depending on the model, right? So we think about cost savings, right? Or we think of something a bit more complex, which is what is called type efficiencies, that is a mixture between quality and so on. productivity, when I talked about productivity, I thought about what a part of the empirical IO literature is doing, thinking about total factor productivity. These things are related, but it's not exactly the same, right? So, yeah. Okay, so now is the difficult part because I am not a theorist and Nikos sits in the audience, so is looking at me. So I try to do it quickly, and then you can ask Nico. So the general framework is coming from this nice paper by Jochen Schutz in Econometrica that is looking at aggregative games, right? So in this framework, you think about a situation where there is an index, the aggregator A, that can be a price or quantity, and summarize the quality adjusted price and quantities of different products, right? And so under the assumptions, the consumer surplus in these kind of games depends on this aggregator, right? And the important thing is that each firm in the market, even if you have differentiated products, essentially make its optimal choice caring only about what the rivals will do through this aggregator, okay? And so if you think about the Kuno model, this is a very simple case of an aggregative game, right? So there is the quantity, right? And total quantity is what firms so the total quantity is what determines the price in equilibrium, right? What they show is that there are some other more general demand system that generate these kind of games when firms are multi-products and choose prices, right? And there are two specific demand systems, the CES and the multinomial logit demand system, that are consistent with this kind of approach or the framework, okay? So what Knock and Whiston are doing is then solving for a merger in this general framework, right? And if you want, this is the generalization of the Farrell and Shapiro famous paper in AR in 1990. Farrell and Shapiro also think about compensating efficiency, right? And they characterize this compensating efficiency. And Knock and Whiston show that that is more general, and for this more general class of models, you can also characterize the level of efficiency required to make a merger consumer welfare neutral. And in this model, to go back to your question, you have two kinds of synergy. In the Cournot model, the only kind of synergy you can have is a reduction of the marginal cost. In model with product differentiation, of course, after the merger, you can have repositioning of the products, you can have quality improvement. So there is a broader concept of efficiency, which is this type synergies, that are a kind of non-linear combination of possible cost reduction and quality increase, right? So these are the two concepts of compensating efficiency. So what you can, so I think the main result that holds for the different kind of approaches and model is that these compensating efficiency are driven by the market share of the merging parties, or the delta HHI. So the change in concentration that that follows the merger, right? And of course, it depends on the parameterization of the model, right? So if you think about the Cournot model, the parameterization of the model is essentially the elasticity of demand. If you think about these more general models, can be either the elasticity of substitution and the share of the outside good. Okay, so just to give you the example for the Cournot model, which I think is the simplest and most intuitive, the compensating efficiency, which is the percentage decrease in marginal costs that are needed to make a merger consumer welfare neutral, which means that the post-merger equilibrium is exactly the same as the pre-merger equilibrium, right? So you have now less firm in the market, but some firm, so the merging firms are more efficient, so which leads equilibrium prices to be the same as before the merger, right? So this compensating efficiency depend on the delta HHI, the elasticity of demand, and the sum of the market share of the merging parties, right? So the Knochen-Winstow paper is not so much about compensating efficiency, it's much more thinking which kind of structural indicator could be relevant in an ex-ante perspective for merger control. And they say, look, what really matters is not the level of the HHI, but it's the change of the HHI, right? I put things in green and in black. The things in green are the things that we don't observe. We don't observe, right? So, but essentially, if you observe a market and you observe the market shares and you think that Cournot is the right model for that market, you can perfectly identify this compensating efficiency, right? So this can be generalized, right? So can you please click? Right, so these are the cost synergy in the model of multi-product price competition and CS demand, right? So here what plays a role is this parameter sigma, which is the substitutability between products. But again, what matters are the market shares of the merging parties, right? You have cost synergies, you have type synergies, right? So, and both of these depends only on these parameters. So this is the framework, right? So Knochen-Winstow give us the structural model, if you want, right? And because we have been collecting data on markets from merger decisions for which we have market shares, we thought this is a nice way of characterizing the effect of the mergers by using this kind of structural model. Okay, so this is a database that we have been building for many years. So the DGComp makes many nice things. One of the things they do is to publish a report for each merger that has been notified to the commission, right? So they publish it, they put it online. So in 2000, when I was a PhD student of Lars Henrik Röller, he told me, there are some nice data and I started reading this decision and we use actually this decision for some papers. At that time, we just had a small sample and we used events, stock market event studies looking at the name of the rivals to make a sense of the competitive effect of the merger, right? So, and after many years, when I arrived at the DIW and I had a bit more resources, I thought, okay, now I hire people to read all these decisions, which are many, right? So they were, there are 6,500 decisions, right? So we had research assistant reading these decisions over the years, And these are documents that varies between, say, 15 and 400 pages, right? They are all structured in the same way. And we collected standardized information from these documents. So the full database has 6,500 mergers. They are not all. For some, we don't have the documents, or some are in other languages and so on. And they affect over 40,000 product markets. Why? Because mergers very often affect several geographic or product markets, right? So think about a merger in the airline industry. A market is defined as a route between two cities. So you can easily have hundreds of markets, right? So, the key information for this paper that we use are the market shares of the merging parties and also the market shares of the competitors. We have some other characteristic. We know who are the competitors. We collect information about entry barriers, product and geographic markets, and other characteristics of the merger. So if you go back to this formula, so that is what we want to calculate. So what we need is delta HHI and SM and the epsilon, right? So if we think at the Keynote model, the epsilon is something that we don't have. So we will make some assumption on it.
Do these merger decisions also indicate whether Keynote competition is a good characterization of the market, or whether something different?
I mean, we are working on that, right? So and again, so we will not use only this model. We use all three models, right? And I will show you that actually the results are very similar. But that is something we are doing. So we have a second database that we've been building. We are improving. There we use machine learning, so text analysis to go I wish I did it before, so to collect even more information. So we are doing it now with machine learning. And parallelly, we are working in a consortium for DigiCom to create a big database. So that is a project, so that will be ready in 1.5 years, where DigiCom asks us to collect even more information, right? So, but for now, we don't. Right, so okay, but again, so we will use all three models that come out of the Northern Winston paper. So we don't use the entire database because for a large majority of the mergers, there is no in-depth analysis. So 85% of the mergers are cleared under simplified procedure. Right, so the market is not defined, the market share not calculated, right? So we focus essentially on the more problematic mergers. Okay, they are more problematic because there was a deeper analysis, and there we have information on the market share for the merging parties. There are some decisions where the information is not separate for the merging parties. There is only the sum of the market share. We drop also this observation. We drop also all those observations where the geographic market has been left open. We drop all the mergers where the Commission also was concerned about vertical conglomerate issues. Right, because the framework we have in mind is for horizontal mergers, and at the end we have this sample of a bit more than 1,000 mergers and 13,000 markets. Okay, so this is just to give you a first view of the data, right? So in this graph you see the naive post-merger HHI, naive, which means we just take the market share of the emerging parties and put them together, right? So, and here you have the log of the delta HHI, right? So we have 3 regions. So these are regions where the market is not concentrated, right? So, and these are regions that, according to the EU merger guidelines, are regions where the Commission would not expect anti-competitive effects to arise, right? Then we have regions that markets are more concentrated, and there we have some regions where the delta HHI, so the change in concentration is not that high, and then we have regions that which are markets that are very concentrated and where the merger will increase concentration significantly, right? So these are the really problematic mergers. These are the a bit problematic mergers ex ante, thinking a concentration, and these are the non-problematic merger. So this would be a presumption-based approach, right? What people did some 10, 20 years ago, and where some people would like to go back, right? So what you also see are these dots. So the blue dots are mergers that the Commission clear with unconditionally, right? And you see a lot of blue dots here, but you see also a lot of blue dots here, right? So mergers where in markets that were concentrated and where concentration increased, were cleared without remedies. Then you see a lot of merger cleared with remedies, which are mostly in this region, but some are also here. And then you have the very few prohibition, they are almost all here, right? Okay, so I like to show this picture because it relates to this discussion about presumption-based or effect-based approach, right? So, and shows that the two things don't go hand in hand, and that is essentially what we do in this paper in a slightly more sophisticated way, right? Not just looking at delta HHI, but thinking about compensating efficiency, right? So now I show you, we take this formula, we make some assumption of epsilon or on the sigma, which is the elasticity substitution, or the size of the outside good in the other models, right? And calculate, given the market share, the compensating efficiency for the free model, right? So I have the free models, each with one parameterization. But of course, I mean, we can change the parameters of the model. So we choose for the Cournot model an elasticity of 1.6, right? This is a strong assumption. We assume that all markets that we observe are Cournot with an elasticity of 1.6. Okay. So what you see is that in this model, the average compensating efficiency is 8.15. So if the word was a Cournot with this elasticity, so on average, mergers should generate 8% cost synergies to be consumer welfare neutral, right? Okay, so this is an average. We show that actually the compensating efficiency need to be much higher in those markets where the Commission identify some concerns, right? Which seems reasonable, right? So these are markets where the compensating efficiency are very high. It's likely that the Commission finds these markets problematic, right? So this is the analysis at the market level. So if we aggregate at the merger level, we see again so nicely that the compensating efficiency, the average compensating efficiency at the merger level are low in mergers that have been cleared in the first phase, higher in mergers that have been cleared with remedies, in phase clear without remedy in phase 2, clear with remedies in phase 1, clear with remedy in phase 1, they are even higher, and the ones that are prohibited are a very high compensating efficiency. This is very similar to the picture I showed you before, right? What you also see is that clearly it makes a difference which model you use, right? And which parameter you have for the average number. But what I show you here is that the distribution of compensating efficiency are very similar, right? And they will move depending on the parameters that we assume. But for these parameterization, which are not particularly so demanding, so we have a large mass of markets where the compensating efficiency are above a cutoff that we say. So 7% is a high level of compensating efficiency. So we look at the compensating efficiency over time, and we see some variation. We have this point here because we have few observations for that year, right? So, we don't observe completely different distribution across time. What we do then is to say, okay, so we observe this compensating efficiency. Can we decompose them according to observable demergers, right? So, and what we look at is at the actual market structure, so the number of firms. Actually, we look at 5 to 4 merger, 4 to 3 merger, 3 to 2 mergers, and we look at the extent of entry barrier. We look at the geographic market, whether it's national, EU-wide or worldwide, and we control for other observables, right? And then we have product market and time fixed effects, okay? I don't show you the regression, I just show you the results. So again, for the Keynote model, we have the conditional Milo compensating efficiency controlling for these effects and observable is 4.4%, right? So it's a bit lower than the unconditional mean, right? So then for a 4 to 3 merger, for instance, with no entry barrier, so the average compensating efficiency go up to 7.9. And for a 4 to 3 merger with entry barriers, it goes up to 13%, right? Again, so the results are very similar independently on which model we use, right? So, and we have also some extension where instead of having one elasticity for each market, we just take a distribution of potential elasticity and take random draws from these, and we show the point estimate change, but the qualitative results stay the same. Now, in the last minutes, we try to make sense of this, right? So, and I started talking about this discussion about the consumer welfare standard. If you want, the consumer welfare standard is related to the so-called more economic approach in Europe. The more economic approach has been introduced at the end of the 2000s. The idea was we think more carefully about our market work. We think more carefully about efficiencies. While this kind of approach is similar to a presumption-based approach with some presumption on elasticity, on compensating efficiency, right? So what we define is a discrepancy, which is imagine that the world is like in our structural model. Imagine that we think that there is a presumption for compensating efficiency that is reasonable, right? So that 7% cost efficiency are reasonable, right? So but more than 7% is difficult, right? Then we would think that a merger that requires more than 7% efficiency gains is likely to be anti-competitive, and therefore we would expect the Commission to do something there, right? So if this merger is clear without any remedies, we would call that a type 2 discrepancy, right? And on the opposite, so if we have mergers that requires very low efficiency gain and the Commission did something, then might be a type 1 discrepancy. And then there is something in the middle where we don't want to take a stance. So this is a complicated table. Let me guide you through the table. So So this is the prediction. So we have here mergers where the compensating efficiency are below 3%, mergers where compensating efficiency are between 3 and 7%, and mergers with compensating efficiency above 7%. And here we have the decision of the commission. Okay, so among those mergers that are likely to be pro-competitive, right, where the compensating efficiency are very low, in 141 of the cases the commission didn't do anything, and in 8 cases the commission took an action, right? So the type 1 discrepancies are very low. Okay, so let's go to the other extreme. So these are mergers where the compensating efficiency were high, right? So these are 346 cases. So in 146 cases, the commission didn't do anything. The merger was unconditionally clear, right? So this is what we call a type 2 discrepancies, right? So is this an error? Of course not, but this is where we see that, say, a presumption approach based on a specific structural model would indicate that that merger maybe is problematic, but the commission didn't do anything, right? And of course, again, this number changes depending on the model and the specification of the model, but what we observe is that independently on that, unless we assume that all markets are extremely elastic, so the demand in all markets is extremely elastic, or there is a lot of substitution between products. So no, actually, for any specification that we try, the ratio of type 2 errors is always higher than type 2 discrepancies is higher than the type 1, right? So this is just a graphical representation. One important thing is to say that the large majority of the cases are no discrepancies. So the commissions is doing, so most of the decisions of the commission are consistent with what this kind of presumption-based approach would say, okay? So what we also look is how this evolved over time, right? So, and I think this is particularly interesting because this more economic approach was introduced in Europe, so more or less with the new merger regulation in 2004, the chief economist team, the new substantive test, and so on and so forth, right? So, and I don't want to read too much out of this, also because we have this spike here, right? So, but so it seems that there is a bit of a trend of these discrepancies to increase over time, right? So, but again, so I don't want to read too much out of this. I prepare this, okay. So what we do then at the end is similar to what you do with the compensating efficiency. We try to decompose this type 2 discrepancy. The type 1 are too little to do any kind of econometrics, right? And again, so look at the type 2 discrepancies that are defined at the merger level, and look the variation of compensating efficiency across markets in that merger, at the share of markets affected by that merger where the merging firm were dominant, so the joint market share was above 50%, where the fraction of markets with entry barrier is high, phase 2 merger, and so on. And we show that indeed, as we would expect, the type 2 discrepancies are lower if there are many markets that are dominant, if there are many markets with entry barriers, and in phase 2 mergers, right? So, so what we want to do is to try to add some additional characteristics that comes out of this text analysis of the decision, like how likely is that this is a market with product differentiation, which kind of theories of harm have been used. But so this indicates essentially that many of those indicators that we think are important for the decision of the Commission decreases this kind of discrepancies. So to conclude, what we do in this paper is to apply a theoretical framework to a database of EU mergers decisions and to derive what are the efficiencies that are needed in these mergers to make the merger consumer welfare neutral. We try to identify the observable characteristic of a merger that correlates with this compensating efficiency, and we use a compensating efficiency in a kind of presumption-based approach to compare with the actual decision of the Commission and make a sense in which kind of mergers the Commission decided to intervene or not. We find that there are many mergers with very high compensating efficiency. As expected, the degree of actual and potential competition are a driver of this compensating efficiency. And we find that although the Commission, so the decision of the Commission very often is coherent with what comes out of this presumption-based approach with efficiency, in the most problematic merger, depending on the specification, there are many cases where the decision of the Commission is not consistent with this kind of approach, which is in line with what some people from the Leibniz Centre conference were mentioning, that possibly a fact-based approach led the Commission to be particularly careful in enforcing merger policy. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.